Hello, and welcome to episode 25 of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. I hope you've all had a fantastic few weeks, or a couple of weeks. I've had lots of positive feedback on this sort of new structure, if you like, and a few of you have already got in touch with ideas for people that I should look into covering the lives of. So if you are listening to this and you have an idea that you'd like me to look into, then feel free to give me a shout and I will do just that. As I said in the last episode, I've got a few ideas myself that I'm currently looking into. Feel free to get in touch. A lot of you are really enjoying the Bobby Graham story as well. It's something that's really interested me. And before we start, I'd just like to tell you about some books that Leslie has got hold of. So there is a chap in the UK who's written a book about Bobby Graham. And Leslie sent me a copy which arrived on Saturday, and I haven't started reading it yet because I'm currently reading another book, but it looks incredibly well written. And if you pay a little extra, there's a CD that comes with it, which I have, which is a collection of Bobby Graham's tracks. I know that Leslie only has 16 copies of this book. 16 copies. So if that interests you, I'm going to post a picture on my Instagram of it today. And today is Monday the 29th, so it will have been yesterday if you're listening to this on the Tuesday when this comes out. So go and have a look, and if you'd like a copy, feel free to message me and I will put you in touch with Leslie to sort you out a copy. I know that a lot of you guys who are listening are over in the States or further afield, not further afield, but we have some listeners in Canada and all over Europe. I don't know what the deal with posting out, but feel free to get in touch and we can sort that out. Everything is achievable. Okay, so I'll just get straight on. I feel like I was going to say some other things, but I won't bore you anymore. I'll let you crack on with the rest of this conversation. So here we go. We start off talking about Dave's work with the Dave Clark 5. So there seems to be a reasonable list of artists that he was recording with a lot. And so he was doing a lot of film sessions. We've spoken about the James Bond, and Dave Clark 5 is obviously where your expertise is, John. I'm interested to know what Bobby's relationship was with that band and how those sessions, how many and how often, and all the details surrounding his work with Dave Clark 5.
Well, initially the Dave Clark 5 were a dance band. They were never a beat group. The Hollies, the Beatles, really started out as beat groups. Dave Clark 5 were playing waltzes and foxtrots in dance halls, which was the music in the early 1960s. In fact, most dance halls, the Mecca organisation, if you went along on a Saturday night, they played waltzes and foxtrots till about 10 o'clock, and then the last half hour, the same band would play something a little more upbeat. And that was how the Dave Clark 5 started. And they had a contract with Ember Records and made a couple of records which didn't do anything in the charts. And then they got a contract with Pye on the Piccadilly label, did a couple of records there. Nothing happened. In the meantime, there were a resident band at the Mecca at Basildon, Basil and Locarno. And they got spotted again by another rep, this time from Colombia, and they were given a contract of three tries or you're out. And the first try failed miserably, and the second one that came along was Do You Love Me, which was the first time that Bob drummed for them, and it was decided to try a totally different sound, and they came up with this new sound. Adrian Courage, the recording engineer, Les Reed, the musical director, came up with this new sound where the drums would be right to the fore and Bob was decided Bob would be the man to do it. And Dave Clark, who could play the drums but was the basic average drummer, wasn't really up to it, certainly not in the studio. So they had to get Bob in, and that's where it all took off. But as for, he didn't really mix with the group at all. You know, he and Eric Ford would turn up and do the drum and bass track, and then they'd go off to another track somewhere else, and the other guys would then come in and do their pieces or their overdubs. So they didn't really see a lot of him, to be honest.
Something that I find interesting, just as a bit of a side note, is the fact that then, I suppose, compared with now and the way that everything is visible now, and back then it wasn't so much. So a band like Dave Clark 5 could go through numerous different guises before making it, and it didn't really affect the way that they were perceived. And you know, you say they had numerous tries with numerous labels, and I would assume they were all under the same name of Dave Clark 5. I could be wrong, but then they suddenly they get a you know, they hook it and it's there, and it's fine, and now we'd be conscious of damaging a reputation. You know, you're almost, if you have a flop, you're damaged goods, and that just certainly wasn't the case back then at all. You know, you could keep plugging away at it until it happened.
Yeah, I kind of think if Mike Smith hadn't sat down and wrote Glad All Over, and if Bob hadn't really hammered the drums on it, then nobody would have heard of the Dave Clark 5 like the Kinks. They were on that three strikes and out, and that was that three strike. If Glad All Over hadn't become a hit, that would have been it for them. I don't think they would have got a fourth try.
All three of those songs you've described are pretty drum heavy, and they're great songs. It's not just Bobby that made them, but he seemed like the perfect, serendipity that he was playing on those songs, and what those songs required was what we've described in his drumming. Really loud, good, great feel, confident.
But what happens when you talk to someone who's loud? You get louder, don't you? Because you want to be heard. Yeah. I think that's what happened with the rest of the band. I think that his drumming and the drive of it elevated the band to bring their A game as well. And that comes through the records so well.
Certainly did. There's an interesting story about that. Obviously Clark was a good-looking guy, and they decided, well, we're going to have him up front with the drum kit, and the other guys behind him, and we've got this loud Bobby Graham sound. This is what the records are going to all be about. And of course, he got a contract with Rogers Drums, so he's up there with the Rogers Red Sparkle drum kit. And
I know this is going.
They made it very, very big in America. As you well know, they were bigger in America than here. And Rogers had an American base as well. So they were up there, again, the Rogers Red Sparkle on the Ed Sullivan Show, Carnegie Hall. There it is, right up front and centre. And all these American drum enthusiasts are going out and buying Rogers drum kits because they've seen Dave Clark playing it. And it doesn't matter what they do, they can't get the sound. Because it was Bobby Graham on a Carlton set. A Carlton set made for him by Johnny Dallas in London, a custom-made set. And it didn't matter what they did with the Rogers set, they could not get that sound. And Bob had his snare turned right the way up tight, didn't he, Les?
Yeah.
And you just could not get that sound out of a Rogers set. So Rogers sold thousands of drum sets to Americans for a sound that they could never make.
Let's take a quick hello to a guy called John Sparcola, who helps us a lot on the site, who was one of those guys who bought that set, and he still has a grudge about it. And Bobby wasn't, you said earlier about being bitter. He wasn't bitter about Dave Clark at all. No. He wasn't. But he did have a right smile. And one day he told me about all those people that brought all the drum kits thinking they could sound like him, and they could never do it because they're the wrong drum kit. So that he wasn't bitter, but he had a little wag at his expense.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. It's just like obviously the Beatles thing with the Ludwig kit, and you could get that sound. It did sound like Ringo. But I absolutely love that. I mean, so much of it's down to the player as well. I mean, presumably they'll have heard Dave Clark playing live, and they won't have been able to sound like it anyway. Well, I mean,
you opened another chapter there. We haven't time to go into all this, but there's two distinct opinions. They were very much like the Beatles concerts, I understand, where you couldn't hear the band clearly. Or the other people say that the sound was just like the records. So you can do your own mathematics on that one.
Well, there you go. And then if it was the record, it was Bobby playing on his Carlton kit, and they're not going to get that sound anyway. Did he have any particular sessions that stood out to him that he spoke about?
In the book, and I didn't talk about them personally, was this French chanteuse called Françoise Hardy. He absolutely loved doing her sessions. It might have been the fact that she was a very attractive lady with a lot of charm, but he genuinely enjoyed that. But the Kinks will always...
She was my girlfriend in the 60s. She didn't know it, but she was.
But there's no doubt his favourite sessions were the Kinks. Absolutely the Kinks, yeah.
Yeah.
And was that just because they were? It sounds like they were quite relaxed guys. I mean, from what I've read, they never complained that Bob was there recording the sessions.
They made him feel like part of the band, and with what John said earlier about how Eric Ford and Bobby played on their tracks, and that's typical of many a session where they were brought in, did a job, and then left, and they weren't part of the band. But with the Kinks, he was part of the band, but he also knew he wasn't there to replace Mick Avery. He was there to help them launch a career.
It just goes to show his, I guess, his humility and where he knows where he stands in. I'm struggling for the right words for it. Not necessarily pecking order, but he's got no ego that's desperate to stay at the front. To be in the limelight. Although, having said that, I know he had a solo career briefly and did other things like that. So clearly there was a part of him that did want some of that.
Yeah, there was certainly a part of him. And I was talking to John about this yesterday. You tend to find lots of 60s artists, particularly when they play now, there's a moment when they get to their solo and you can see their face lighting up like Christmas because they know the light's going to be in them, and for that moment they're going to get the acknowledgement for what they did 50 years ago. And there was that aspect from Bobby, but humility definitely. He was, the person that I knew was very humble. As I say, for 5 years I was a friend and had no idea what he'd done. So he wasn't like, oh, did I tell you about the time? But he told me a few stories afterwards, I've got to say.
There seems to be a couple of specific stories about particular artists that were difficult. I mean, Dusty Springfield is a story that I've got here about. I mean, it says she had a thing about drummers. I mean, I know a lot of artists who have a thing about drummers.
Dusty Springfield was a female singer in the male industry who, when you think about the 60s as well, and perhaps the struggles that Cilla Black had to be heard in a natural voice. And Dusty Springfield was a brilliant singer, perhaps the finest this country's produced.
Yeah.
And she had to be that person to get what she wanted, because otherwise she would have been told how to sing.
She was a perfectionist as well. Everybody who worked with us said she was an absolute perfectionist. It had to be exactly right. And I think that's where Bob would be the man. To make sure the drum part was correct.
It seems there seems a big thing. I mean, I've talked about it numerous times on the podcast, but a big divide between the American sound and the British sound. And I suppose that just the quote that I've read from Bobby talks about Dusty Springfield's frustration with not being able to get the American sound because. I mean, they're using English equipment and and English musicians, and no matter how great of a feel Bobby had, it's not going to be exactly like some of the American guys.
It's not going to be exactly, but there's a massive Phil Spector influence on a lot of the recordings. So she had a fair go, I think.
So then, I mean, following on from the session scene, he started to do a bit of production. Which is a theme that you see a lot in drummers. I mean, he clearly knew how to to get on with people, and he clearly was able to sort of interpret. I mean, Dusty Springfield's a great example. Interpret what people want from their music and help that process along.
Well, I think John knows probably more about this than me, but his first real job was for the Pretty Things, and the reason he got the job was because no one else could hack it. To be honest, they were such boys in the studio, and at the time he was a bit of a drinker and a bit of a social player himself, and he kind of fell into that job and did a brilliant job on the first album, and the second he produced as well.
Yeah, with the Pretty Things, they were renowned for being difficult. They were very, very good musicians. I talked to John Maxworth, the record engineer, and he told me that if they booked the Pretty Things in for a session, they would book an afternoon session and tell the Pretty Things it was a morning session. And that was the only way they would get them in on time. I said they would drift in ones and twos, hungover from the night before. He said, but once they sat down, they were absolutely brilliant musicians. He said it was just getting them there and sitting them down, sobering them up and getting them to play. And as Leslie says, I think that Bob would be the ideal bloke for that, rather than some music director who was probably 30 years older than them and from a different life altogether. These art students, they were all ex-art students and knew how to enjoy themselves. And I think Bob fitted in better than the older music directors that they were having to answer to.
There's one thing we can't work out on the first two albums, because there's definitely Bobby playing on there, and there's Viv Prince who inspired Keith Moon. This is how good a drummer he was. But the way Bob told it in his book was that when Viv finally made a session, they'd stick him on the stool. And if he could stay on the stool without falling off, he played in the session. If he didn't stay on the stool, Bobby sat in. But they were two similar drummers, so you really have to know your drums, or have to have been there to know which one did which track.
Yeah.
I suppose Bobby at that point will have been, you say he's a bit of a drinker, so he's able to get on with them on that level. But then also some of his experiences with, for instance, the Joe Brown band, which was a very disciplined band, will have sort of held him in good stead for times like these where it's all right to have a laugh, but the bottom line is you've got to get down to business, and they're going to listen to somebody that they respect. So if he can command that respect in a way that they understand, that's what made him such a good producer for the younger artists.
Most definitely, yeah. And I think the big thing was for that band, as John alluded to, that a lot of the producers that they were asked to work with didn't understand them. Well, he certainly understood them. And I kind of think that when the session got going, it probably just was press play and record and let them do their thing. I don't think he had to do too much production there, to be honest.
It sounds like a producer's role it's the traditional producer's role, isn't it? I mean, I found the same discussing with Shel Talmy. I'm not suggesting that they didn't have to do very much at all, but the modern day interpretation of what a producer is certainly very different to what sort of Bobby's role will have been back then, which was probably more of a mediator, a facilitator, than somebody who's actually involved in any of the mechanical side of the recording.
Yeah, again, I don't know too much. Maybe John does, but he certainly wasn't an engineer in the studio at that time. He did develop those skills and to become quite a good producer, but he was more facilitator, more of an organizer, perhaps the one that was the best behaved at the band as well.
So we're talking about Fontana Records was where he started mainly producing. Am I correct with that? I'm
Pretty Things were on Fontana.
And Fontana actually did release Skin Deep, which I found a recording of on YouTube, which was a cover version of a Louis Bellson drum track that he played with the Duke Ellington Orchestra. I mean, that's sort of harking back to the jazz thing, and it really shows off not that he was just a solid pop drummer. I use pop in the sort of R&B term, but he really was a genuinely accomplished drummer. He was fantastic, and you can hear it on that recording.
If you'd seen him be literally carried onto the drums and then play that solo, which I've seen him do twice in my life, then I was just in awe. And at the end of it, he'd have to have about a 5-minute break to get his energy back again. But he would never hold back. You never got a 50% performance from Bob. You'd always get 100, 110%. And he loved doing that song. He absolutely loved it.
What I'm gonna put a link to that so that the guys listening can hear it. I'll find the YouTube link. Was he disappointed that his sort of solo stuff didn't do more and he didn't carry on with it, or did he ever speak about how would he have liked to have done more solo material?
I don't know personally. He may have talked to John about this, but it probably wouldn't have been good for him, because had he joined the Beatles and been open to the success they'd had, he wouldn't have coped with it. It wasn't in his nature. He was more of the man that John described, the Beatles session, who turn up, play the session and go. I think every artist, like Mickey Mouse, for example, had a sort of pop career before he was an excellent producer. They all had a go, but I don't think it was no more than that for Bob.
Yeah, I think you're correct there. And another point about the session musicians, and with no disrespect to Bob at all, was that a lot of session musicians didn't have the persona or the looks to be pop stars. There's a big difference between somebody who could front a band and stand there with a microphone and look good to all the women, and some of the session musicians just weren't that person. They were good at what they did, but I don't think they could ever be band leaders and pop idols.
Were you, John, aware of this scene when, in when you were sort of growing up with that stuff and into the Dave Clark 5? Were you aware at all that that this sort of session scene existed?
No, not at all. No. I can't really recall when I discovered it, but I didn't really know anything about session musicians at all. It was just something that came along later on, when I heard about the Wrecking Crew, for instance, and said, well, there was session musicians in England as well. Was there? And then suddenly you find out, well, all those records you've been listening to, they are actually session musicians. And it comes as a big shock. And there's a lot of people still don't believe it.
To give you a perspective, probably 60 or 70% of the records that you heard in the 60s had session musicians. You mentioned in your podcast, as Shell told me, about a session where the band turned up, none of them played, and I've sent you a link to that. There was a band called the Staggerleys that came down to do a session, and not one of them appeared on the records. You did get Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, Alan Whale, Eric Ford, you got Bobby Graham, but not one of them, because they just weren't capable of doing the session. And one other story I'd like to share is that I got contacted recently by a lead guitarist from a very famous 60s band who actually has a different persona on Facebook, so he doesn't get bothered. And he was arguing with me about Bobby's input into a particular track. And he may be right, I don't know. But a lot of 60s musicians still don't want people to think it wasn't them on the records. Whereas they're the ones they've got the notoriety, the success, and they're the ones that could handle it as well, like John was alluding to. And they still want the public to think it was actually them that did this.
And there's still a lot who think it was them that played on the records.
There would be a case where people would do a session, and I'm sorry to keep talking about Dave Clark, but Bobby did tell me this one story where the society was getting used to the fact, or suspicious, whether it was actually Dave playing on the records. So he held a recording session and invited the journalists, and he gave them lots to drink first. And in the session, he played drums, a basic drum track. It could have been Glad Love, it wasn't one of the more complicated ones. And then when the session finished, Bobby was wheeled in to record the drum track that was playing the records. And these journalists would have thought, oh, I heard that, I saw it, and then that's the record. And they put all the bits together. But the reality was, it wasn't that.
The other thing that happened was that in a lot of cases, the group would come in and play the track, and then the producer and the record engineer would listen to it after, and then bring a session musician in to redo it. So the group went away and then listened to the record and said, "Oh, is that us? We sound great." and it wasn't. But they didn't know that. They didn't know they'd been overdubbed or whatever. They still think they played on the records.
It's absolutely mind-boggling. And I'll be honest, when I started this podcast, it's not a subject I anticipated talking about, to be honest. It didn't even cross my mind. But it's such a huge part. I always keep bringing it up, but the Beatles, seem to play. They played their own instruments.
They brought them out.
Yeah, they did, and that's where, if your perspective of the '60s music, like mine is, comes from there, you're not necessarily aware of this scene too much. And actually, it was the norm. It seems like that was. The Beatles were not the normal at that time.
No, they weren't the norm. And the other funny thing was, I was a massive Beatles fan growing up, and I wish I knew more about Dave Clark 5, because I've learned subsequently that they produced some very, very good music, and lots of it, and not just the familiar songs. A lot of the album tracks are great as well. But I didn't know about those. But I was a Beatles fan growing up, and to me, yeah, that was the norm. The four guys that played the records that took you to these magical places. I had no idea about session musicians.
It seems a bit like, the sort of image in my head is of it's sort of the grown-ups being the record labels and the session musicians doing all of the stuff, and then you get the pretty young singers in their sharp suits, all matching, to stand at the front and sell the records, and not even they're aware of what's going on behind the scenes, as you've just said, John.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. In a sense, it gives us something to talk about, but it's not the pretty side of the music industry. It feels, it does feel a little bit. I guess that's just what it was, but yeah.
So if they had Pro Tools back in the day and had 3 months to record a single, then they probably wouldn't have needed a session musician. They could have cut and pasted themselves all over the place. But they had 3 hours to do 4 songs, and they had to be hits. And if they weren't hits, the band was dropped. That's the way it was.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of it as well. But if they had all the gear that we've got nowadays, we wouldn't have had those amazing records.
No,
we wouldn't have
absolutely.
had those, the mistakes that we've already spoken about, like the hit at the beginning of the Kinks track, and that was a mistake. And that's what we love about that era, and that music's exciting because it has that feel to it. What was Bobby's overall sort of outlook on that period of time? Did he have an overall? He looked back on it fondly.
Yeah, absolutely. Towards his later life, and this is where I really came into the scene, he had regret that he hadn't got the recognition he deserved. That's the only regret that he had. And that's kind of why I do what I do, and why John does what John does, because of the people he supports as well. I just try to let people know a little bit about what this guy actually did, because otherwise it would just be a name on a type thing. But one of the most joyous things for me was 2 things I'd like to say. One is discovered so many people that did know about Bobby, who shared their experiences on a Facebook page we have. And the second, I went to saw Sunny Afternoon, as I said, the Kinks. And I went backstage because the 2 guys that played Ray and Dave were absolutely superb. I went to say congratulations. I really enjoyed the show. And I said, do you know about a guy called Bobby Graham? Yeah. And it was like brilliant. I was like, yes, because I can't half expect them not to know anything about him. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that really makes it worthwhile.
It's the same for me. I'm enjoying learning about. The more I look into him, the more I discover, and it's I can't wait to get a copy of the book from you, Les, when we finally get one. I'm excited to know more about him, and it's like a thread being pulled, isn't it? As soon as you start looking, or what's the analogy? It's peeling wallpaper off the wall. Once you peel a little bit, you can't help but peel it all away and just be like, oh, I can't believe he did all this stuff. It is amazing. And does he? I suppose I'm sort of hesitant to mention it, but his drinking did get the better of him towards the late '60s, and he sort of seemed to fall out of the music scene a little bit, and he got himself sober in the 2000s, if I'm correct. And was that around the time that you met him?
Yeah, that's about the time. I think he was sober before 2000, but he was definitely sober when I met him. I would never know he was a drinker. There was 2 Bobby Grahams. So, but yeah, he certainly was a drinker back in the day. There's no doubt about that.
I suppose that it was a boom time for the music industry, and that it was almost, he will have had cartage for his drums, where they would have brought the drums to the sessions, and he probably would.
He took them himself. He'd pack them in the car, unpack them. There's a famous bit of video which unintentionally we sold to Jimmy Page. There's a video of Jimmy arriving at studios in the 60s what Bobby took before Jimmy was known. And in the video, you can see Bobby, someone else shot this, unloading his drums himself, which he had to do 3 times a day. Jimmy would turn up with his little guitar, that's it. But Bobby had to unpack the drums. And for anybody like yourself who knows about that, he would unpack and pack them 3 times a day, every day, and had to cart them himself. So, yeah, there was nobody carrying the drums for him.
I'm showing my ignorance. I see the word cartage written down. And to me, cartage means, if you're... In my eyes, he's a successful session player, and cartage is successful session players now often have companies that they will pay money to go and set the kits up for them, and that's cartage means that. I mean, presumably it's actually just petrol costs and just the cost of the fact that he has to drive there and lug it all in. So excuse my ignorance, but then it will have been a time when he's. Drinking and driving doesn't matter so much, and presumably it was just a fun time to exist, and it's exciting that he's doing all these sessions, and I mean, it was probably very tempting, or not even aware of the fact that he was falling into drink, and it was just happening.
I don't think there's drinking and driving it, because during the day they'd be working. It was after the sessions, so that was when the drinking would take place, because they didn't have time.
Okay.
He might have in those days he might have a quick one in the pub between sessions, but you're not talking about turning up to a session drunk, but certainly drinking afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, so it makes it. I think that the point I'm getting to is trying to get to is that it was an exciting time to exist, and there was definitely. Not a party atmosphere, but a celebratory atmosphere, because there's a lot of money floating around and a lot of good sessions happening, and everything was moving very quickly. Stuff was recorded and released very fast, and whether people knew them or not, they were hearing themselves on the radio or were aware that other people were listening to them on the radio. So it must have been a very exciting time for them to be a part of.
I think at the time it was going so fast they didn't appreciate it. It's only in later life when they look back. But let me tell you a story about one famous session for PJ Proby and Hold Me. And the session was booked from 10 to 1. And PJ arrived at 10 to 1. So there's likes of Jimmy Page and John Paul and Bobby there, who by the time that he had arrived, they knew the song backwards. And they did what they rarely had a chance to do. They actually rehearsed the song. Normally, as John said earlier, they'd have sheet music, they'd learn it, and then get the feel quite quickly, but they actually rehearsed it. So when he arrived at 10 to 1, they recorded the song and the B-side from 10 to 1 to 1 o'clock. It became number 1.
Amazing.
2-1 takes.
Incredible. I just want to finish off by speaking. We've discussed. We've kind of been talking about the site. So the site is. I will have spoken about this in the intro, and I do an outro to these podcasts too. So I'll talk about it then as well. But you guys both run a Facebook page dedicated to telling Bobby's story.
Well, it was started by a guy called John Ellis from America who started it. And he's a real fan of session musicians. And then he invited me on board. And another guy called John Smarcola, who's very much into technical side of things. And John helps as well. So there's kind of 4 guys that kind of do it. But we've hit some big numbers. So in the last year, we had 250,000 views of the videos we put on there. Wow. We've got 800 followers at the moment, and if it's 800 or 8,000, it doesn't matter, because the people that are there because they want to be. And I guess the only regret is there's not more material out there. I've literally gone everywhere I can find videos of the time, and I've recolorized them, and I put some of them through Pro Tools to give a little bit more life to the recordings. But there was such a lack of material from that time. So that's the only frustration. I'd love to have the 15,000 tracks and stuff, but they're not there.
As I said earlier, there's not even a list. I can't even find a list. I've found a handful. I could make a Spotify playlist of some of them, but I'd need, and you guys obviously know a huge amount more than I do, and let me
just throw some names off to you. So the ones I just did from memory: the Kinks, Dave Berry, Dave Clark 5, Kathy Kirby, Francois Hardy, Eddie Mitchell, John Layton, Dusty Springfield, Petula Clark, Peter and Gordon, Michelle Ponroth, Joe Brown, Van Morrison, Baby Please Don't Go, Gloria, Here Comes the Night, Tom Jones. Yeah, that's just a few names.
I think it's probably easier to list the stuff he's not on.
It's amazing, and it's so frustrating when you talk about how much he's done and how little information there is, or not information, but sort of information on what recordings he's on, and sort of you almost want there to be some sort of like an all music credits page where you can just scroll through them all and go like, oh, he's on all of those tracks there. No,
it just doesn't exist. This is why we need a time machine. So if I had one, I'd love to go back there for a year just to have the excitement that John had, being there, because I wasn't there at the time. I was too young, unfortunately. But yeah, that's why we need a time machine.
Well, that's why I think that, what you guys are doing is so admirable, and sort of my podcast feels like it pales in comparison to the effort that you're putting in, and I just love that. I'm having a really great time learning about all of these things, and I just love that I find people like you guys who are working really hard to keep the fire burning, like as clearly Bobby wanted, and with sort of gradually peeling back that wallpaper and finding out more and more stuff about these guys, and this sort of like as I said, like a hidden part of the industry that I didn't even anticipate talking about, and that's why I don't know names. I didn't grow up knowing the name of Bobby Graham. I just knew, now I suddenly go like, of course I've played Kinks covers. I played Kinks covers at Butlins. I've done exactly that, and you have no idea who the sort of renown of the person I'm learning the parts for.
Don't forget, we're talking about one musician. There was so many others. He was one that we knew. Us two guys knew, and that's why we talk about him. But he was one of many that did that.
I've been one of a sort of a trend I'm seeing in trying to get people to come and speak to me is that a lot of these guys who've gone on and had. Bobby's career seemed to sort of peter out into the 70s, and he went and did some other things. And some of the guys who carried on working have told their story a few too many times and just don't want to talk about it anymore. Even though I would say for my generation and younger than me, there's more that needs to be told. I think there's more that needs to be found out. And I think it's great that Bobby was happy to speak with both of you so in depth about what he did, and he wasn't tired of talking about it, and was happy revisiting it.
I think so, yeah.
Amazing. So one other thing I should quickly mention is about the Bobby's book that we've spoke about. I think before we started recording, but so Les, do you want to speak about it quickly?
Yes, so Bobby wrote a book with a leading barrister called Patrick Harrington. He's one of the country's top barristers, actually, who was actually just a fan of Bobby's. And the book was printed in 500 copies. They became sold out and become quite a rarity. And they pop up on eBay every now and then, people asking £80, £90 for them. And I managed to get hold of, from Sean, Bobby's son, about 25 copies, which I sent all over America and all over Britain. And then there's been another demand. So I reached out to Patrick Harrington. He's had some more printed. So in about a month or so, we'll have the book. It will be sold for £7 from the website, plus whatever postage to wherever you are in the world. And £1 of that's going to charity, which it basically just covers the cost of the book, because all Patrick wants to do is to get people to have the chance to read it. So it's not a profit engineer, it's a sharing information.
In fact, that should... Oh, sorry, God, John.
When the book came out originally, this was with it.
It's a CD, the Session Man. So is that a compilation of tracks he's played on?
This is Bob playing on with his own band on some of the more famous ones that he did for other bands. And I don't know, Les, is the CD still available?
Yes. Patrick's got some of those as well, so I can try and get some of those as well, yeah.
I think this will be going out around about the time people are listening to it. Hopefully, if it is a month that you're hopefully getting these, then it should be around the same time.
I have to say, there's one thing that won't be given away with the book.
Oh, a pair of Bobby sticks. Amazing.
Yeah, this is my pride and joy. This is his last pair of sticks he had.
Fantastic.
And I don't know if you can see closely, but they've been... So they've got marks on them.
Yeah, beautifully worn away. Love it. Yeah, fantastic. When did he stop playing? He's touring around with his jazz band. Is it just around sort of where you guys are living?
Yeah, he did jazz band. He also did a lot of school performances.
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
He had Alan Warner of the Foundations, one of the original Foundations, in his band. All of them were session musicians, and he would go and play for schools, and that's where I kind of got involved. And I filmed some videos of him playing at schools for kids. And his last performance, I was at the Barge in Hartford, which was about 6 months before he passed away. And the last song he played was Caravan.
Wow. That's a great final song.
Well, he started a jazzer, he ended a jazzer.
There you go. Amazing. So I'll put links to all of the stuff that we've been speaking about, and I'll try and compile some interesting recordings that I can find. Hopefully you guys can help me with a bit of that, just to give anybody who was a bit like me and didn't know an awful lot just a bit of scope of what's there to listen to, and you can really hear some of the things that we've been talking about. And I hope that the people listening to this will go back and revisit some Kinks recordings and Dave Clark 5 recordings now with fresh ears. And I
would say to the people that don't not enjoy the music, because the music is still fabulous, but it's just worth knowing a little bit more about how the record was made. Yeah,
I suppose that links with, it's kind of what I was interested with, John. What you finding out slowly that these weren't the people that you thought they were at the time. But it sounds like it hasn't ruined it for you. You're here talking about it, so it must have made it better.
I mean, the other four guys in the group who I know very well, about, unfortunately 3 of them are dead now. But no, they all had good words for Bob and Eric. And no, it doesn't disappoint me. I know they are all good musicians in their own rights. So no, it hasn't spoiled it at all.
Fantastic.
One thing that you might try to do when you get round to listening to some records, and I think it's a good one to listen to, is Brian Poole and the Tremolos did "Do You Love Me," and the Dave Clark 5 did "Do You Love Me." They were both released the same year. They were both recorded at the same studio, and Bobby drums on them both.
Very interesting. Right, I've scrolled that down, so I'll link to those. I haven't got them on the top of my mind now, but can you hear similarities in the drum part?
No, not at all.
No, not at all.
Really? Amazing.
Well, I would have thought it was quite funny where I don't know, he recorded the Dave Clark 5 one first, so it must have been quite funny for a few days later to be called into a studio and say, "Oh, what we doing? Oh, you're doing Do You Love Me?" "Oh, I did that the other day."
I love it. It's incredible. I just love that idea that they're getting called into the studio however many times a day and they just don't know what they're doing. I just find that amazing. And they could have played on, 12 tracks a day and just boshing them out. This quickly adds up to the 15,000, doesn't it?
That's right. If you think about it, the group have probably written the record themselves. They've practiced it upstairs in the pub or wherever, and they've got it all set, to go and record it. But the session musician who turns up, he's just given a bit of paper, a bit of music, and said, "Get on with it." and he doesn't have a chance to practice it or anything. He just has to go and play it, whether he's drummer or guitarist or whatever. He's just got to go sit there and do it. So that is absolutely amazing to me that they could do that.
It really does show how talented these guys were, and I think it's very easy for particularly I find younger musicians, which is a lot of the reason that I want to do this, that they hear those records and they think, you know, they might hear a Kinks track and think, oh, the drumming on that's really simple. And that's not it. That's not, you know, we're not talking about the technicalities of which order the notes are in. We're talking about, you know, how the notes are played and the feel of it, and some really intangible things that make somebody like Bobby as great as he was. And I love just what you've spoken about, John, about the fact that they could go in and just do it when it was taken. Some of these bands will have rehearsed it, and they come in and knock 4 out in 3 hours. You just think it's incredible.
3 times a day.
Yeah, it's amazing. It just shows how good they were. And there's, just because the part is simple. I mean, you've only got to listen to that Crazy Drums track I spoke about, and then you realise how he was technically proficient, as well as having the great feel and the confidence and the loudness and all the stuff that makes him so great. I mean, it's fantastic. Thank you both so much for coming to speak to me about it. I really appreciate you taking the time out.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for doing what you do as well, because you're doing the same as us. We just want people to know about, you know, the history that went behind the music.
That's it, exactly. And I will link people to the Facebook page, and hopefully there'll be a few more followers, and I look forward to keeping on reading a few more of the stories that you post and listening to some of these records. So there we have it, the life and career of Bobby Graham. As I always say, I hope that you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Been listening to loads of the Dave Clark 5 over the last couple of weeks, and trying to find more stuff that Bobby Graham's played on, and it's been a really lovely and eye-opening little adventure into a particular 60s don't really know what to call it, musical genre, if you like. Yeah. Anyway, like I said in the intro, feel free to get in touch with me if you'd like a copy of the book. I will start reading it and post on my Instagram about it being good. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fantastic. I'm really excited to read it. I love reading these sort of niche little books about people's lives and getting a sort of an insight into an area of the music industry that we don't often get to see. In 2 weeks' time, I am chatting with Ben Pike, who is a good friend of mine from Leeds. He is a musician, multi-instrumentalist, and a producer, and we've worked together on a couple of records. And now he runs a mastering studio called Rare Tone Mastering, which is a analog mastering studio, and he has some ridiculous pieces of gear that are very sort of Beatles related. There's a Fairchild and a Curve Bender EQ he's got, and loads of other stuff. And I was really keen to pick his brains about the mastering process specifically, and how he uses and chooses to use those choice pieces of gear that he has got. So if you're curious, look into Ben before that conversation. It's Rare Tone, which is RARETONE mastering. He has a website, and he's also on Instagram. And he masters all sorts of stuff, but recently I know he's been doing a lot of kind of power pop stuff. So it's worth just checking out his sort of Instagram feed, so you know what he's working on, because it's always really incredible to check out. So prepare yourself for a little bit of a techie episode. Obviously it's going to be in 2 parts, and at one point it gets very... I ask him some quite nerdy questions about how he goes about mastering stuff. So yeah, I hope that you will enjoy that conversation. Yes, so that's that. I would like to thank you all once again just for listening to this. You know, as I keep saying it, but the podcast is growing. Every episode I put out, it grows more and more and more. And again, as usual, I can't believe how much it has grown from, starting this just under a year ago. So yeah, thank you all for listening and spreading the word. and just being part of this sort of a little adventure that I'm on. So yeah, thank you. If you'd like to get in touch with me for any suggestions or anything, my website is allyouneedisdrums.com, and there is a contact form there, or you can email me, joe@allyouneedisdrums.com, and my Instagram is @allyouneedisdrums, so feel free to get in touch. And that just leaves me to say thank you to Joe Kane of the Poppermost fame for the intro and outro music he supplied for this podcast, and my good friend David Henshaw for the artwork that he supplies every fortnight. Have a wonderful couple of weeks, and I will see you back here, or listen to you back here in 2 weeks' time with Ben Pike from Rare Tone Mastering. Goodbye!